People in this country don't realize that we are poor and getting poorer. Instead, right now, we're squabbling of who gets what share of a shrinking pie. But what we do have is an establishment that has decided that the solution to Britain's problems is to pretend that they don't exist and to demonize the people who point them out. We've become afraid to say what I've just said, that immigrants, like me, have a duty and an obligation to do everything in their power to become adjusted to the place to which they've come.
In the end, the financiers will have the final say. And what happens then if it becomes a tussle between extreme left and extreme right? Konstantin, thanks so much for giving us some time again. Really appreciate it. And it's great to see you.
Great to see you.
Triggernometry is, in my view, a really good show. A lot of Australians love it. How's it going from your perspective? And what are you learning about how Britain and the West are changing?
Well, first of all, you got to remember, I don't know if we've discussed this before, but when Francis and I started Triggernometry, we didn't start at zero. We started at below zero. We had no money, no connections, no social media presence, no real access to guests or anything like that. So for us, just the fact that we have a show with a team that we can pay and have that to us is a blessing that we genuinely don't take for granted, and we are grateful for, actively grateful for every day. It continues to grow. I think the other thing with our show is we've carved out a bit of a niche for ourselves in that many people take the shortcut of bolting themselves onto an existing political movement, and they become the mouthpiece of a particular party or a particular ideology. And it's a very effective way for getting successful quickly. But for us, what we've wanted to do is to be the place where people from different sides can come and have a rational discussion. And sometimes with different issues that come up, we might have guests that come on and we have a conversation in which we simply nod along to everything they're saying because they're making arguments wonderfully, and then have the same guest back and have a robust debate because there's an issue on which we have a different set of perspectives. And that is incredibly rewarding. So we are growing quickly. Everything's going wonderfully. Our videos and audio is doing very well. But that's never been the driving force behind what we do. The driving force behind what we do is to try and understand what's happening and adjudicate the different issues. And there's clearly a market for that. Now, that market is not as big as the market for, is Bridget Macron a man, or all this other nonsense noise that you get on the internet. But that's the market that we want to speak to. And it's very, very rewarding that we're able to do that.
Well, it's really a market for thinking people who want to be informed and try and make a difference. But how do you make a difference today? I mean, anyone can see how frustrated the people of Britain actually are. They're all looking for leadership. They're not finding it in the political sphere. In a sense, what you're doing, and more modestly perhaps what I'm trying to do in Australia, is provide a conduit for good, clear thinking. But you also want to equip people. How do you see yourself as contributing to citizenry being more engaged and making a difference?
Well, our job is really to try and adjudicate as best we can the issues that are being debated in society at that time, and to bring on people who've got an insight into, and that's helpful. It gives you a bigger context for understanding what's going on, whether that's the war in Iran or the economic situation or the consequences of mass immigration or whatever, the transgender debate or whatever. To be honest with you, and forgive me, you're a very good friend, and you're a former politician, we find the way that politics has become very unsatisfying and very toxic. And the moment people associate you with a particular political wing, then the sort of the brain switches off at that point, it feels to me, and they're no longer able to process ideas. So while we occasionally interview politicians, it's usually a very dissatisfying experience. We do it out of necessity, and sometimes they're really valuable, important interviews. But broadly speaking, we'd like to do what we actually are doing here, where we're recording this at ARC, which is to operate at a level that's above politics or below politics or whatever the directions are. That is to say, to operate at the level of the ideas. And I've always said this, if Keir Starmer or Andy Burnham or Zach Polanski had ideas that I agreed with, I'd vote for them. I'm really genuinely not ideological about it. I'm interested in what works and what's true. And that's all we're trying to do. And in some ways, that's very unambitious. In other ways, it's a very ambitious thing. And that's really all we can do. And then for other people, people often say to us, what do I do? And I don't know is the answer, because I don't know what the circumstances of your life are. Are you a police officer who is dealing with certain problems that we talk about on the show, and are you in a position to do something about those problems from the inside? Well, maybe that's what you do. For other people, it's reading certain books to their children. For other people, it's homeschooling their children. For other people, it's making some kind of difference in their local community. It's different for everybody, but I think truth and courage is two things that we try and encourage.
All of that is very sound, but while I'm driving it, I understand entirely that people are frustrated with politics. All of us have to face the reality, frustrated or not, that it is how we run the place and it matters. But I think we all feel like we need equipping, and we all need to be challenged, A, to be engaged, and B, we then have the problem of thinking through how we can make a difference. And so often, as you say, it's simply manning your station and doing your best and looking to make a difference, and perhaps casting an eye around to see if you can make a difference in some area that you've not been involved in. It's being active as a citizen and being responsible as a citizen, which is really what ARC is about, I guess.
It is. And look, ultimately, if the problems our societies face are going to be solved, they will be solved at the political level. Ultimately. But what politicians come to power and implement the changes that many of us would want depends on what society produces those politicians. And I really don't think we as individuals living in our societies today can absolve ourselves of the responsibility for the politicians that we have running the place. Because obviously, problems are structural, but I don't think we can deny that as individuals, we contribute to these problems ourselves. We have got to a position where, as a society in this country, less so in Australia, but in the United States also, we live beyond our means already at the expense of our children and grandchildren. And we demand that politicians lie to us and tell us that's possible for all eternity. And as long as that's what we demand, then we will get the people who are prepared to lie to us about these things. I mean, I know that the government you were part of was very strongly focused on fiscal responsibility. I haven't heard those words used for decades now in the Western world, really. And perhaps that's because it's electoral suicide to use those words. I don't know. But until we as individuals and as voters are prepared to hear uncomfortable truths instead of wanting the comforting lie, that won't change.
You've really encapsulated two enormously important issues there. The first is our cultural problems, our division, our breakdown of trust, our atomisation means that we find it very difficult to pull together in a common cause. That's the problem at the electorate level. At the political level, the problem is we lack leaders who have the courage to call out the truth. I heard a senior political advisor, a man I respect hugely, here the other day saying, we will go nowhere in Britain until somebody tells people what they instinctively must realise. Britain will only be recovered if it takes some very tough medicine.
And right now, we are living through an age of simple solutions to complex problems. That's what people think. And that's why you see the rise of the far left and the far right, because that's what they offer. They offer magical solutions to some problems and completely ignore other problems that really do matter. Until and unless the public see that these are unworkable, nothing's going to change.
Therapy government. Don't confront anybody with the uncomfortable truths.
Right.
But that's not where thinking citizens want to be. Jordan Peterson showed us that. I remember him saying to an audience of 1,000 people, don't think therapy government is going to take you to a good place or solve your problems. They're not. You need to work out who you are first, go back into the public arena and try and make a difference. So just to encapsulate, just to sort of draw that to some sort of logical point that we need to recognise, the fact of the matter is that Britain's debt problems are horrendous. Now, you've had how many prime ministers in the last few years?
Well, I think we're about to hit 7 in 10. 7 prime ministers in 10 years.
Now, this is quite extraordinary. Nobody can lead for long enough to make a difference. One thing I learnt in government, you have to be there for quite a while. You have to be able to see difficult programs through. Now, Britain's debt is such that false moves under the likely even further left leadership that you're inflicting on yourself, I think will result in the markets freezing and a financial crisis. In the end, the financiers will have the final say. And what happens then if it becomes a tussle between extreme left and extreme right?
That, I think, is the reality of where we're headed. And I hesitate to say that I don't want to go there, because I am convinced at this point that the public will not see the truth until they're confronted with it in a way that they can't escape. And I agree with you. The huge risk in that situation is they will reach for the people who offer them simple explanations on both left and right. But that's the only place there is hope of things changing. I don't mean the far left and the far right. I mean a situation in which things get really difficult. That's where you could actually have a proper readjustment of our priorities and the way we see things. So I think, as I said in my speech this morning, we're in for some hard times.
I think that is the reality. Now, Britain, of course, the British people, that sort of bulldog instinct of days gone by, they've been known for letting things slip away fairly bad, the old chap, until it's serious, and then hauling themselves back. The 1930s being a classic example. No one wanted to listen to that warmonger, Churchill, warning about what was coming. And then when it arrived, they turned to him, and he turned out to be, for all of his many failings, a remarkable leader, and the British people rallied. You're an outsider looking at the British people with great perceptiveness. Well, I don't want to say outsider, you're not.
That's fine. I am somewhat of an outsider. Now I feel like I've done my very best to become an insider too, but I still retain the outsider perspective. So
that's what I'm driving.
Yeah, of course, I know what you mean.
Yep.
Yeah, we've become too sensitive about these things.
Is that bulldog instinct, if I can put it that way, do you still see it there?
I don't know. I don't see it in this moment in the same way that I think if you were an outside observer in the 1930s in Britain, I think you'd also say, I don't see it.
Yeah.
So whether it's latent in the culture and will emerge when faced with real challenge, we will wait and see. I honestly don't think the future is never predictable, but I think right now the future is particularly unpredictable. And the point you make is the one thing we do know is we're living beyond our means, and that can't last. But what happens when we hit crisis point, I don't think anyone knows. I don't think anyone knows what happens at that point. So we wait and see, and it's not going to be an easy time.
One of the American forefathers made the observation that there are two ways to lose your freedom as a nation. One is military conquest. The other is to cripple yourselves with debt. Globally now, debt levels run, if you took the whole globe in terms of its annual production, our debt is at 95% of GDP. Britain's is probably even higher. It really, really limits your options as a nation. And as somebody who admires this country and wants to see Britain have a say at the table of international affairs, you've been so good at it for so long. It really does terrify me. Perhaps we can't take it any further than to say to people it will require unbelievable courage and resolve and a willingness probably to wear a lot of hardship to turn Britain around. That's the blunt reality, but you need leaders who will own it and say it.
You do, but I also think, with all respect to the British public, they're not remotely prepared to hear the truth from which you could make all those conclusions. People in this country don't realize that we are poor and getting poorer. And this explains largely the appeal of the far left, for example. So there's some recent polling done which shows that the vast majority of people in Britain think that we are as rich as Switzerland, as rich as Singapore, as rich as the United States, as rich as Australia on a per capita basis. And we're not remotely as rich as any of those countries. But they think that we are. And so what I think is happening is a lot of ordinary people clearly experience that they are getting poorer. And at the same time, they think that we are like other countries. And they go, well, we've got the sixth largest economy in the world. Well, not on a per capita basis. We've got like the 27th largest economy in the world, and we're about to be overtaken by Poland. That's no disrespect to Poland. They've done very well. But for a country like Britain, that is not a flattering comparison. But nobody knows this. And so what they see is, I'm getting poorer, and then there's guys driving around in Ferraris in London and living in mansions. And that's when they say, oh, inequality, we need redistribution, we need tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. And, you know, most people are economically illiterate because it takes a lot of time to become economically literate. You have to read things, talk to people. We've been blessed in the journey of our show of talking to people who could explain it to us. Because when Francis and I started our show, we bought into many of these very same ideas. And many of the debates Francis and I have had have been about this, actually. And the process of running a small business, which is what trigonometry is, seeing the impact of taxes, seeing the impact of regulations, seeing what happens when the government makes it so much harder to hire and fire people, all of this has informed us a little bit about how the real world actually works. But if you don't understand any of it, if you just think that jobs sort of grow on trees magically by themselves, then it becomes very tempting to say, well, there's a bunch of rich people who are exploiting everyone, and if we just take their wealth, everything will be hunky-dory. People don't understand that when you do that, all those people will leave, the jobs will leave with them, and you take a low productivity country like Britain and you make it less productive, and you therefore make it less prosperous. And until people wake up to that reality, I think that they're just going to keep banging that same drum. They're going to keep looking at people like Zach Polanski and the far left or the Labour Party as the way to go. I mean, Keir Starmer actually tried to reform welfare in this country, and his own backbenchers didn't let him. That's where we are. And so as long as people keep thinking that the way to manage the economy and the way politics should work is about getting the most for me, not being responsible, but getting the most for me. There's an unlimited pool of money there, and what politics is about is to fight over how big a slice I get, how big a slice people like me get. As long as we have that mentality, we will never focus on the thing that actually matters, which is how do you make sure the pie is growing so that we're all getting more prosperous over time. Instead, right now, we're squabbling of who gets what share of a shrinking pie. And until we realize that's not the right way to go, that's what we'll keep doing.
We face, as a situation in Australia is not so terribly dissimilar, per capita, we've been in recession now for quite a long time. Productivity has stalled. What does productivity mean to the man in the street? It means our competitiveness, really. It means baking a bigger pie every year for a population that's expanding because of immigration, and we'll come to that in a moment, not because of natural birth increases. And there's less and less to go around on a per capita basis at the same time as it looks as though the economy's growing. They're not actually hard concepts for people to grasp if they're properly explained. But we haven't had leaders who are willing to, or have, the courage to go out there and say, this is what we face. You remember Britain's darkest hour, the Prime Minister was very blunt. I have nothing to offer you but blood, sweat and tears. That takes courage, but it draws out the best in people. We're playing to the lowest, most base instincts.
We are.
We're actually insulting people, if you stop and think about it, because we're not telling them the truth about what they face and what their children will face.
I completely agree. And I also think the World War II metaphor is a little bit challenging to apply to an economic problem, because when you're being bombed on a daily basis by German bombers, the nature of the threat is palpable, it's real, it's there. It's deeply offensive to your psychology. Your country is under attack. We must all pull together. There's a genuine threat that we perceive. But we don't have that at all. The reality of Britain is that the government is busy running around pretending the bombs aren't falling. And people are largely cushioned for now from against the economic damage that is being done. And so, of course, they don't see it. And the other thing I would say is, politicians are, unfortunately, because of the way we measure economic growth, they are incentivized to prioritize GDP. And this is where I think much of the impetus for mass immigration comes from, because a politician who's in charge of a country that's got an aging population, that's got dipping productivity, they need to deliver economic growth. What does that mean? Well, it means they have to increase GDP. What's the easiest way to increase GDP? Well, is bring some more bodies in who make very little money. Right. But a politician who stands up and says, actually, we're going to stop measuring the economy that way and we're going to look at GDP per capita, they are the swimming against the tide. And so that's a change we have to make, in my opinion, around the world. We have to measure prosperity in a better way. It may not just be GDP per capita alone. I'm not an economist. I don't know if that's the best measure. But the incentive structure is perverse, and it's creating perverse outcomes, as of course it would always do.
When you and I first spoke some years ago, you made the startling, to me at the time, remark that Britain's attempt, if you like, at social engineering, controlling what people could and could not say, was resulting in more people being locked up for hate speech than were being locked up in Russia, by a very large margin, I might add. This is a very important issue, and it goes to the heart of what we've been talking about. We need to talk about the things that matter. You don't get good public policy if you're shutting debate down, if you're not having debates, or if you're perverting the debates. What's the state of free speech like in Britain today? Because, see, just about every other trajectory since you and I first spoke has deteriorated. Our fiscal position's deteriorated. Trust has broken down even more. We're more atomised than we were. The international threats are greater than they were. But maybe, just maybe, we can at least talk about more now than we could then?
Yes and no. I think let's separate these out. So the Russian comparison, first and foremost, I think this is really important. That was before the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
And the situation has very much gone in reverse, in that in Russia people are being arrested left, right and center for expressing opinions, for holding up placards with anti-war messages, and at one point for holding up blank placards, which was hints at an anti-war message. So I was never in that conversation suggesting that Britain is more authoritarian than Putin's Russia. I was just saying that for us to even be in the same conversation is a very unflattering comparison.
It made a point.
It did. So that's that aside. And then we come to what we're talking about in terms of people's ability to express their opinions in this country. Well, the law it has been applied to people like Graham Linehan, who was arrested in an airport for a tweet that he made when he wasn't even in Britain, nor is he a British citizen, as far as I understand. So, and there were many, many other instances of people being arrested or spoken to by the police over this kind of thing. And perhaps, even Keir Starmer said things have gone too far in that direction, there's perhaps been a bit of a rollback. I don't think it's been rolled back nearly as much as I would like, but nonetheless. But what we do have is an establishment that has decided that the solution to Britain's problems is to pretend that they don't exist and to demonize the people who point them out. And I thought the tragic murder of Henry Novak and his horrific treatment by the police was a very good example of this, because the big conversation, as you'll be aware, in the UK is about so-called two-tier policing.
Yes.
The idea that not all groups ethnic and other religious groups are treated equally by the police and other authorities, by the way. And what's amazing to me is anyone who's been alive for the last 10, 15 years and awake and paying attention would have seen that we had the summer of BLM was a pinnacle of this, but throughout this time, there's been a determined effort to say that different groups must be policed and otherwise treated differently. And the rationale was this is to compensate for inadequate, unfair, disproportionate, unbalanced treatment in the past. And so what we must do is bring ourselves into the 21st century where we're particularly sensitive to the concerns of this group and we police them slightly differently. And, stop and search is a problem because it disproportionately affects certain communities. No one will tell you that it's disproportionate because the levels of offenses in those communities are also disproportionate to their share of the population. So anyway, we had this idea for 10 years that we need to treat people differently. And then when you see the police following the advice of the College of Policing and actually being so concerned about someone who was racist that they basically ignore a guy who's been the victim of a stabbing because his assailant claims that racism was committed. And at this point, of course, the entire establishment comes out and says, how dare you suggest there's been different treatment of different groups when they have spent the previous 10 years saying we must have different treatment of different groups. So it's the politics of gaslighting. And I said this at the time, Nigel Farage made some comments about what happened to Henry Novak. And then for the next 3 days, I opened the online newspapers that I still read every day. And if you didn't know what had happened, you would have got the impression that Henry Novak was killed by Nigel Farage's comments. Because the actual issue of what happened was not remotely being discussed. And there are, I don't know if this is true, but there are some rumors now that the families of victims of crimes, high-profile crimes like this, get visits from a special government unit which coaches them on how they must respond to, quote, avoid public disorder. And so what happens is the government coaches the families of victims on what they're supposed to say, and then that very same government comes out and says, well, we must listen to the wishes of the family. And of course, they will not listen to the wishes of families like that of Rhiannon White, who was murdered and whose family were very clear that they thought that the answer to the horrific crimes of the type that happened to their daughter was to stop illegal immigration. But no one ever hears from them. And so perhaps the overt censorship, in some respects, has not been as brazen, although we are banning. I mean, there are people on left and right who we have had on our show, or who we know. For example, far left people in America, Hassan Piker or Cenk Uygur. These are people we've interviewed on Triggernometry because we believe in speaking to all kinds of people. They've been not allowed to visit the UK. Now, of course, these two morons claim that it's about, Britain has become a Zionist state, which is idiotic. We've become a tyrannical state in this particular respect. We believe that the way to solve public problems is to shut down the discussion. But other than this more overt censorship, what we really have is a kind of establishment narrative that says that the way to address these problems is to pretend that they don't exist. And all that does is put the lid down on the pressure cooker, and the pressure cooker keeps boiling.
And when it explodes, we don't know where it's going to land. Yeah. Rupert Lowe's Restore has been behind a review of what really happened with the grooming gangs, as I understand it. Because that was, to me, it's still mind-boggling that so many people in so many parts of Britain's society, its hierarchical structures and so forth, for so long tried to bury the reality that working-class British girls in vast numbers were being abused. And they did so out of a fear, it seems to me, of looking racist, and maybe it's worse than that, looking as though they were somehow anti-Muslim. Well,
so in many people's, those two things are the same thing because they don't understand the difference between race and religion.
Has that been deliberate, by the way?
I don't know.
Just fusing
I just think most people have a very low resolution take on it. I've read many things about it, and actually that make clear that many of these networks, kinship networks, actually predate Islam arriving in the parts of the world from which the immigrants who've come here who committed those crimes come. It's my understanding of grooming gangs is they were more akin to the mafia in the United States. These are kinship networks that engage in organized crime. And these girls were not just sexually abused, they were trafficked. And the same trafficking networks that would sell drugs, they would ply the girls with drugs. So it's a very complicated thing. It's a horrific thing. We've covered it on Triggernometry, interviewing survivors, interviewing people like Maggie Oliver, who's a police officer who blew the whistle and lost her job and has been campaigning heroically on this issue. We've interviewed a number of survivors. The first time we appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, Francis and I, was the first thing that we brought up. So it's an issue we have been raising because it's a travesty. And there's been a lot of criticism of Rupert Lowe's report into this, and some people, say the methodology is this. And I ultimately think the fact that it brought it yet again to the public conversation is ultimately the most important thing. And so whatever people's reservations and my own reservations about some of the elements of that party, the fact that the issue of grooming gangs has been maintained in the public consciousness and that we continue to see pressure on governments to deal with it and reform the institutions that fail these poor girls, I think that's a universally good thing. And I think it's a good thing that happened, and the people who are involved in that, including Rupert Lowe, to be commended for it.
Do you think it's still going on?
From what I know that it is, yeah.
That's pretty frightening.
Yeah.
It does bring me to the rather surprising, for me, advice that there are a large number of Sharia law courts operating in Great Britain. They reflect a very different culture, and I don't see how Sharia law can be totally aligned with British common law. Can a country have two legal systems?
Well, obviously not. Obviously not. Of course not. We have to have equality under the law in this country. And if there are people who wish to live under Sharia law or any other kind of law, then they should avail themselves of the opportunity to move to countries that have it.
Is it true that there are a large number of these courts operating?
To be honest, John, I am not an expert on it. I do not know what the number is. I know that there are some, and that is incompatible with British society.
It does seem something that, if I were an Australian leader, I would want to know, and I suspect they're operating in Australia, what are their rules of evidence? Is it compatible with our human rights law, their decisions, etc., etc.? I think this is a very serious problem. But
my view on these things. My view is we are British citizens. We should all be equal under the law. We should be subject to the same law. We should, as immigrants in particular, and I say this as an immigrant, we should adjust our expectations and our behavior to the culture and laws of this society instead of demanding that our heritage and our cultural traditions become the traditions of this society. I don't believe that's what this country is for. The British people have been very welcoming to people from all over the world, but my view is that was always on the understanding that the people who come become citizens of this country in the fullest meaning of that term. That means that they contribute to the society. My view, and I've been saying this to people in the political realm for a very long time, and it's only recently become acceptable for them to say, is I don't understand why people who are not citizens of this country get access to the benefit system, get access to welfare, get access to social housing. These are not things that should be happening. If you want to come here from another country, get a good job, pay your taxes, that's wonderful. And if you eventually want to become a British citizen and acquire the rights and responsibilities that brings, there's a process for that, and I think as I am at the end of that process, you should be incredibly proud of having done that. That should be an achievement. Becoming a British citizen, as it is in America, should become an achievement that you're proud of, that you're buying into something. But buying into something is a two-way process. And we've increasingly, I remember people saying, well, I live in this country, I don't have a British passport, why should I blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, you've got this completely wrong. You are a guest here. And when you're a guest in someone else's house, you have to behave with extra respect, extra courtesy. You have to be extra wary that you are really doing everything in your power to make this as comfortable an experience for the people whose home you're in. And if eventually they say, well, welcome, you can live here and you're one of us, at that point, then it becomes your house. And your duty remains the same, which is to look after it, to protect it, to make sure that you help the other people there. And I just think we've got that relationship completely wrong. And we've become afraid to say what I've just said, that immigrants, like me, have a duty and an obligation to do everything in their power to become adjusted to the place to which they've come, as opposed to bringing their own ideas about what's right and true.
The American, and I'll round off here because you've been generous with your time, Thomas Sowell, has been writing to the effect that we should not assume that civilizations will, and this is what we've been talking about, will survive. They won't. He says it's more than just building them, maintaining them, defending them. You have to understand them. This goes to the heart of what you've been saying. If you come to a place like this because you perceive you want to live there, it seems to me to be very important to understand the underpinnings that made it the place you want to go to. And Sowell says that if you want a civilization to survive, your first necessity is to understand what fueled it, what built it, what sustains it. And of course, Karl Marx said, a people deprived of their history are easily persuaded. We seem to be easily persuaded of anything. You've just alluded to it, the idea that you can sponge off a system, and I'm not just talking about immigrants, that you can assume that there'll be more and more there because there are people driving Ferraris in London, without actually understanding that there's a role for civic responsibility. There's a role for being engaged. There's a role for paying your taxes and obeying the law. There's a role for civic education. In other words, civilization cannot be taken for granted.
And I think this is where Jordan Peterson performed a unique service to the West and to our civilization. Because when crusty old conservatives talk about responsibility, it always lands like finger wagging, this is what you must do. But what Jordan did, and I saw this when I spent several weeks on tour with him, and you see it with the people who come up to him and talk to him about the impact that he made in their lives, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions at this point, is he explained to people the direct connection between the act of taking responsibility, crudely summarized as cleaning your room, and your own life being better. In other words, even if you want to be selfish and individualistic and narcissistic, it's still better for you to operate in the world with responsibility. And that to me seems like the only argument that in our society we will now hear about it, because the vast majority of people do not hear the idea that, you must take responsibility for some sort of abstract greater good. You must take responsibility because that's the only way your life is going to have meaning and purpose that you actually deep down crave and want, and in the absence of which you're miserable, depressed, addicted, and lost. That was his great message, and the fact that he was able to share it with the world, and the fact that it landed with so many people tells you something about it, which is it's true, and it works. And that's why I think, those of us who admire him while he's on the bench for the moment. I hope he comes back soon, but not too soon, whenever he's ready. We have, I feel, a duty to carry on saying that and actually living it ourselves. And I've certainly tried to do that to the best of my ability.
I think you're building on his legacy magnificently. I salute you. I admire you. I wish you all strength. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me again, John. I appreciate it.